I want to give a brief overview of the model. And if you're going to be facilitating a 5-behavior session, it's probably a good idea to have read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. This will give you a sense of what the model looks like in action. But I'll spend a little bit of time here talking about it on a conceptual level. And if you want to open up the participant profile to page 3, you'll see a picture of the model there. As a facilitator, you'll want to be able to see the big picture, how each of these different pieces build on each other, each of these 5 different pieces. And even beyond that, some of the immediate associations that we naturally have for these terms, like trust or conflict or accountability, are not precisely the way Lencioni is talking about them. He's actually talking about them in a deeper way. And the degree to which we can get teams to understand an idea like trust from a new perspective and help them see the value of it, then this program is really going to shine for them, and they're going to take away that much more. So at the base of the pyramid is trust. But Lencioni is not talking about just any type of trust. He's talking about vulnerability-based trust. And here I want to read a passage from his book, The Advantage. This is what happens when members get to a point when they are completely comfortable being transparent, honest, and naked with each other, where they can say and genuinely mean things like, I screwed up, I need help, your idea is better than mine, I wish I could learn to do that as well as you do, and even, I'm sorry. And I really think the word transparent is core here, because as we go through the later stages, we'll see that team members are asked to do things like hold each other accountable, be candid with each other, admit their mistakes, to actually willingly invite conflict. And you don't do these things comfortably and regularly unless you trust the people around you. You have to trust that we have a solid relationship. I know that she has my best interests at heart, and she knows that I have her best interests at heart. And because we have that solid relationship, I can tell you directly when I'm angry or when I disagree. I know that there might be some tension, but I also know that we're going to be okay in the end. I know that we're good. On the other hand, if we have a situation right now where people are guarded, they're defensive, people are hiding things, those later stages are never going to fall into place. Okay, so the next behavior is conflict. And again, Lencioni has an unconventional, or at least not the common wisdom about the role that conflict should take in the workplace. Usually, if I hear that I'm going to a workshop on conflict, I assume that it's about reducing conflict, or at least managing it. But what Lencioni is saying is that good teams actually need to invite conflict. So he's not talking about nasty personal battles here, but what he calls productive ideological conflict, conflict about ideas. This is the freedom to disagree with each other. He cites in his book all these examples of teams where people keep quiet about their opinions, they may hold grudges or be resentful, but they don't openly disagree with each other. But if you don't openly disagree and debate, well, maybe you'll come to a decision, but when the time comes, people aren't going to be able to commit. And we'll get to that in a minute. But here, in conflict, it's really about debate. And I find that word debate is a really good term to help participants wrap their head around the nature of conflict here. This is about being willing to sit up and say point blank, I disagree with that, rather than saying to yourself, it's too much trouble to disagree, or I don't want to get into it, or the boss is just going to overrule me anyway, or I guess they'll find out it's a bad idea when this whole thing collapses, which is essentially like saying it's not my problem. We're all part of a team here, and we all have an obligation to muster the effort and the courage to speak our minds. We don't silo ourselves off and shrug our shoulders when we hear a bad idea because we are a team, not working as independent agents, but working as a cohesive group. Again, why is this so important? Well, one, it leads to better decisions. But two, people are not going to buy into an idea unless they've had a fair chance to have their opinions heard. And that's the third behavior, commitment. When you have commitment, you have everyone facing in the same direction. People are committed to the idea that, yes, this is going to be our focus. Yes, this is where we're headed. Lencioni makes a very strong point that commitment is different than consensus. It's not infrequent for teams to have a disagreement about the direction they should go. In fact, it's healthy to have some disagreement, right? To have a variety of different ideas. But when people leave the room, let's say the meeting room, even if we disagree, we decide that everyone is going to put their energy into that direction, that goal. Now, if we reflect back, it's impossible to get that buy-in if people haven't had the chance to disagree, to voice their objection, and to feel like those objections were really heard and digested. That's why the previous step, conflict, was so necessary. And in his book, Lencioni actually borrows a phrase from Intel. It's disagree and commit. Leaders need to make themselves vulnerable enough to hear all of the opinions, to have their ideas called into question, to have an open discussion about it, but then the direction is set, and people on the team commit to that direction. So there are two pieces to commitment: clarity and buy-in. We need to be absolutely clear about the direction we've set. There shouldn't be any room for misinterpretation, because if we disagree with a decision and there's ambiguity in the decision, guess how I'm going to interpret that decision? That's right. I'm going to interpret it in a way that favors my opinion. All right. So clarity. We need clarity. And then there's buy-in. Every person on the team understands and accepts, even if I disagree with our direction, I have the responsibility to commit to it. I don't nod my head and then go back to my desk and trash the decision to others. I don't do the pocket veto. I don't put it on the bottom of my priority lists. I don't ignore the decision and just go my own way. I put my full weight behind the direction my team is headed. That's my responsibility as a team member. Okay, the next behavior is accountability. Once we've chosen a direction, team members need to hold each other accountable for it. And it's a good idea here to clarify with participants that this is not about personal accountability, like taking personal responsibility. It's about holding each other accountable. And this, in my opinion, is by far the hardest of the 5 behaviors, but it's perhaps one of the most valuable. In fact, I've looked at data from thousands of teams, and on average, this is easily the behavior on which teams get the lowest scores. And it makes sense. Think about your own experience. How comfortable are you telling another person on your team, hey, I feel like you've been letting a lot of deadlines slip lately? Or, I feel like the rest of us are having to pick up the slack for you. These are really uncomfortable things to say. Maybe when we reach a boiling point, we let them spill out, but that's usually far from being productive. Most of the time, though, these things don't get said between team members at all. What you do see is people complaining about a third person behind their back. So there we've got gossip, we've got secrets, back-channel communication, we've got these great seeds for office politics. Or a disgruntled person goes to the team leader and says, hey, you take care of this. Well, here there's a good chance the team leader hasn't even seen this behavior directly. Now she has to take sides. And when she confronts the person, they feel like they've been ratted out. They're resentful. They're paranoid, understandably. Maybe they get passive aggressive. Not only is this whole thing incredibly inefficient, but it's also incredibly toxic. So what would help the team avoid all this? Well, if they had a culture where people directly came to each other and did the confrontations one-on-one, But that's an extremely difficult culture to develop. And that's the reason you do a program like this, to build a culture where people hold each other accountable and they're comfortable holding each other accountable. But we see now why the earlier behaviors are so necessary. People aren't going to hold each other accountable if they don't have a solid, trusting relationship. And they can't hold each other accountable if they know people never really committed to a clear direction in the first place. That's why when facilitating this material, we can't just skip to the obvious problem area, like accountability, without really spending time on trust first. The foundation needs to be laid before you get to an advanced behavior like this. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, we have results. The ultimate purpose of any team is to get results. Maybe that's money, but maybe it's the number of students being able to read better or fewer prisoners returning to jail after they've been released. But all teams have goals. And Lencioni acknowledges that if you're doing the 4 earlier behaviors, you're most likely getting results. But he does recognize that there are still a few obstacles at this level. And one of the most pronounced is when team members put their own personal goals above the goals of the team. So, what does this look like? I think we've all seen it. We've got someone just looking out for their own career development, or they're just going to do those things that are tied to their bonus, or maybe they want to secure their share of the budget, or they want to look good in front of the boss. They want to get credit. When people are pursuing their own goals over those of the team, we soon have a group that's going in a dozen different directions. The team is not moving in unison. The energy is all over the place. People are territorial, they're political, and the forward momentum is dead. So for this behavior, the focus is on not just results, but collective results. What we need is people who are willing to make sacrifices for the team, put their own individual needs aside, and take pride in everyone succeeding, not just them. A true team mentality. Okay, so if we step back, we can see a little better that achieving all of this, it's not traditional training. You as a participant are not being fed static information. You'll learn about ideas, yes, but that's not the most important part of this. The most important part is going through the experience. It's a transformative experience. The process of going through it with a team changes you, and it changes the team as a whole. It bonds you on an emotional level, and there is this tacit contract among team members that we're all in this together. And that's the real power of this program, a genuinely cohesive team.